Conference Committee report on House File Number 2, an act relating to employment, creating a family medical benefit insurance program. The report is addressed to the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File Number 2, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 3 out of the 3 members on the part of the House and 3 out of the 3 members on the part of the Senate. Richardson moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File Number 2 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the maker of the motion, the member from Dakota, Representative Richardson, to explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is my my motion. It's a good day in Minnesota when we are able to work to ensure that families will be able to care for themselves and for their loved ones as well. The need to care for ourselves is universal, and it is something that touches all people's lives across age, region, community type, family structure, political party, life stage, and yet only 1 in 4 people have access to paid family and medical leave. Heading into conference committee, the House and Senate files had some significant alignment, and there were also several substantive differences. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the changes that were made in conference committee. One of the most significant changes related to the timing of the implementation of this program. The bill that left this chamber initially had premiums and benefits starting on July 1, 2025. And as a committee, we worked jointly on a timing change, and the bill now has premiums and benefits starting 6 months later, January 1st, 2026. Another change is related to a cap on premium. The bill that left the chamber had no cap, and this has a 1.2% cap. The conference committee jointly developed a provision related to the actuarial study that is commissioned by DEED, which allows the department to adjust the premium rate subject to the cap. And as it relates to weeks of leave, an employee would be able to take up to 12 weeks of leave for family leave or 12 weeks of leave for medical leave. The overall cap, if someone were to experience both a need for family and medical leave in the same calendar year, would be 20 weeks. New provision from the conference committee is language that comes over from the Senate that creates an account to pay the PFML premiums for direct care workers. There was a $20 million appropriation related to that. We worked together as a conference committee to develop and adopt a definition of seasonal employees, and that is inclusive of hospitality workers, where employer receipts for the quiet half of the year could be no more than 33% of the receipts during the busy half of the year to qualify under that carve out for seasonal businesses that are employing seasonal workers. It also creates a certification process for the department to administer. The committee also worked jointly to modify the small business assistance grants that are within this bill. For small businesses that find it necessary to hire temp workers or to increase the pay of current workers to cover a shift for another worker who takes paid leave, and the maximum total grant amount that would be they would be eligible for in a calendar year is $6,000. The report also adds clarifying language around state income taxes, making it clear that the benefit is in fact taxable and that workers have the opportunity to elect to have those taxes deducted from benefit payments. We also worked within the conference committee to develop language and add provisions related to misrepresentation. The new language establishes that if an applicant obtains benefits by making intentional false statements or other fraudulent means, that they would be guilty of theft, and that the current fraud statutes that we have in place would apply. We also clarified that the definition of active duty includes both foreign and domestic deployments. I want to take a little bit of time to spend just lifting up some of the ways that this bill supports small businesses, because we've heard quite a bit about the need to ensure that we are supporting small businesses. I talked briefly about the small business assistance grants that would be available annually that would provide that total grant award of up to $6,000 to hire temp workers. And we narrowed the access to that to the smallest of businesses. So for employers with under 30 employees, and also with revenues that would be under $3 million. There's also premium reduction for small business owners. And this is not a new provision in this bill. This is the provision that was in the bill when it left this chamber. For the smallest business owners, those with less than 10 employees, many of those will pay $0 in premiums. For example, under this bill, an employer with 9 employees who each make $50,000 or less a year would not
Members,
have to...
please take your conversations off of the House floor. Representative Richardson.
They would not have to pay any premiums for that year, but employees would still be required to contribute. And businesses with less than 30 employees would also see premium reductions as well. It's a graduated scale, and it creates a space to ensure that we are not only supporting workers, but we're also supporting our small businesses as well. This conference committee report reflects a collection of voices, perspectives, and experiences, including groups representing employers, large and small business owners across the state, the insurance and construction industries, realtors, city and county considerations, nonprofit and social organizations, the faith community, and importantly, families. There is strong bipartisan support for paid family and medical leave, because families know that a serious illness or an injury can be devastating for families, not only physically, but financially. And a uniting factor is that all of us at some point are going to need to care for ourselves or for a loved one. And the reason that there's such strong support for paid leave is because Minnesotans care about each other, and we know that families are worthy of care. And with that, Mr. Speaker, looking forward to today's discussion.
There is a motion at the desk. The clerk will read the motion.
Damath moves that the House refuse to adopt the report of the Conference Committee on House Law Number 2, and that the bill be returned to the Conference Committee.
I recognize the maker of the motion, the member from Stearns, the minority leader, Representative Damath, to explain your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I am making the motion that this bill would be returned back to the conference committee. As you know, members, the majority, the House Republicans, Senate Republicans, were not given a spot on this conference committee. And so effectively, as you have heard on other bills, the voices of 48% of Minnesotans were completely shut out of the process. As you did your work and brought together what you thought would be the best thing, you only listened to just over half of Minnesotans on that. You only represented half. Well, we have things that we have brought up as this bill was first brought onto the House floor, as we debated it and passed it off this House floor, completely bipartisan. We have things that we feel still need to be discussed on this bill. And I want to be clear that Republicans do supporting families and Minnesotans when they need to take the time off for a medical reason, the birth of a child, caring for a loved one. We do support that. You also heard that we offered a very reasonable option that would accomplish the same thing, that would have not expanded government bureaucracy. it would have not created a brand new division within Deed. It would have not created new payroll taxes for both employers and employees. And as Minnesotans are watching, I want to make sure that when you hear the Democrat majority talk about premiums, it sounds nice, but it's actually a payroll tax. It is not just a premium, it is a tax. What we would have proposed also would not have required a new IT system to be built from the ground up. And you know that Minnesota does not have the best track record when we build IT systems from the ground up. I believe you are going to be hearing from my colleagues on this motion to return this conference committee report to the conference committee to actually do the work that needs to be done. You will be hearing the details of that and why it is important. We have listened to Minnesotans on this. We know this is something that is important, but as proposed in this bill, it is not sustainable. It is not going to work. It is not affordable, and it is very, very concerning. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to request a roll call on this motion.
Representative Demuth requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Is there any further discussion to Representative Demuth's amendment? Representative Joy, if you're seeking recognition, you can rise to seek recognition. The member from Clay, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm surprised this bill came back to us. I think it needs to go back to conference committee. Again, we're shut out. Our voices are silenced. I was surprised to see that my senator on the other side of the aisle sat on this conference committee. We had a meeting with 64 businesses in our district, one of them being American Crystal Sugar, so it was small to big. That said, they do not want to see this move forward. This is going to hurt us in the business world. Main Street businesses, this is going to hurt. We keep saying it's a premium, but it's a tax. And you can pass it on. We said, well, you can pass it on to the employee. Again, last night we talked on the floor. As we continue to do this to businesses and pass this on, what we are doing is we are continually taking money out of people's pockets. So if we are going to give the person a raise in the highest time of inflation, we're now going to pass on a fee to them, a tax. And we think this is a good idea. Even though we can avoid the premium for the employer, but we're going to push this back onto the employee. You know, think about it when you own a cleaning business, if it's 2 employees. You're forcing this back on. You know, when we think about this, this program right here that we're deciding on, that we had 0 representation on, is going to create 400 new employees for Minnesota. Again, Minnesota's growing employees. Apparently there's no shortage of workers. We'll just grow 400 new employees. When you look at that at $20 an hour at an average for an employee, we're growing our payroll here in the state of Minnesota over $16 million a year. That's at $20 an hour if we pay these 400 new employees. $16 million a year to run this program. Just that. That's not paying benefits or anything. I don't understand. I know this is a program to make sure that people get time off, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. Opt in, opt out. They say there's provisions in here for smaller employers and they don't have to. This doesn't work. $16 million a year. You know, when we look at this and we're like, payroll's going to increase 400 new employees, it's $16 million a year just for the payroll side of this, and nursing homes are closing. I guess this is good for us. This is what we want. This is what everybody wants. No, this isn't what small business want. You continue to force mandates, regulations on every business, and we want to make sure people are having a better life, better living, but we're forcing it out of their increase in their payroll because we have to pay for these somehow, everything that's coming through. And I can guarantee through this program, it's not going to stick to these numbers. It's going to fall way outside these numbers. The numbers in here are just a feel-good number, I I think. Why don't we send this back to conference committee, get bipartisan work again on here, and get everybody at the table, and not ignore. You know, maybe in this district down here, this is what they want. In my district, I had 64 employers say no. I don't know if this is our way to attract employees from North Dakota because we offer paid family over here and they don't. This is how we create more people to come over and fill our job gaps. I don't know. I mean, but this isn't the program everybody wanted. I just am surprised Minnesota and the Democrats continue pushing these hard programs of a $16 million payroll year. Now, I'm kind of curious, is Minnesota state employees exempt from this? Probably not. So we're going to have a payroll tax, and that's $16 million of new money, I'm sure, we're creating. So that's going to have to come from somewhere, too. Why don't we send this back? So we moved the numbers around, got less weeks. What are we doing? What are we doing here? I know we will get debated that people need time off. They need to be gone from their employers. We don't have the numbers in here what it's going to cost the employer. We can apply. So my wife can leave my place of employment, a business we own, and I can apply for the $6,000 grant because of my small business. To me, I think that can be some fraud too. I don't think that's a good idea on this bill because it's going to be used wrong. Again, here we sit in the chambers debating a bill with no representation from this side of the aisle, ignored us, knew that we just have to take it. We have the trifecta, we'll force it over there. They'll be fine with it. When do we figure this out, that this isn't what everybody wants in Minnesota? This is not what all the employers want, small businesses. We heard this, all of us got emails on this. Don't do it, stay away from it. How about we sit down and figure out something else? Opt in, opt out. If the employees that work for me or work for anybody in small business, they stay with us because we take care of them. Now we're going to have the government telling us how we're going to take care of them. Don't do your help, Jim, that when they were off for COVID, you still paid them even though they were part-time employees. Their car was broke down, you helped them. You fixed their car for them. Takes all those options we did before and forces it to this program that we have to follow by the state. Let us run our businesses. Let's not have Minnesota come in and tell us how we are going to run our business. That's what we're doing here. We're doing this with everything we do. Retirement, with this. Here's what, if you want a business in Minnesota, here's what you're going to do. This is ridiculous. Members, send this back. Let's get some bipartisan work on this. Try to work through this, see what we need. We don't have to rush it through this year. Let's put it back in next year. Let's talk about it. Let's listen to every business owner, every business voice in Minnesota. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the conference committee report for House File 2. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of the Dameth motion to return this back to conference committee because it's a new day, it's Groundhog Day. Another report has come before the body where there was no minority member on the conference committee. I just don't know why you keep doing it, honestly. We know you have the votes to pass a lot of these bills, but the point is that the voice of the minority should not be silenced. And when you refuse to seat a minority member on a conference committee, to even allow our perspective to be heard in public, that is a disservice to this body and to this institution. And that is why it needs to go back. Members, we know you have the votes. We know you have control of all three branches of the legislature and the governor's office. But that's not the point. The point is that we need to be able to have our voices heard and represent our constituents. And we are unable to do that when we are not even in the room. And when we don't even know when meetings are happening, when discussions are happening, when the public cannot even be informed of when they could come and follow the conference committee or watch testimony. It is wrong, members. That is beneath this institution, and it is beneath your leadership of this institution. So I encourage you to, in the future, appoint minority members to the conference committee. And because that didn't happen in this instance, I urge the body to send this back to conference so that it can be considered with minority viewpoints in public view. Thank you, members.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the conference committee report for House File 2. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I stand to resend this back to conference committee. When I first retired, my first job was at our local Simon Ace Hardware in Lakeville. I did it for a purpose. I missed the part in law enforcement where you get to connect with people, and this was the opportunity to do that. And everyone knows Ace is the place with the helpful hardware person, so I figured I'd go in there and learn a lot. Unfortunately, I didn't have all those skills, and I had an alternative motive. I got 3 daughters. I wanted to learn some skills on plumbing, electrical, and this was an opportunity to learn so I could get into their houses when they finally have their own homes, help them, and maybe get a free dinner out of it. But I will tell you, it was much more. I shopped there. They recruited me off the floor, not really for my skills, but honestly, the young manager said it was because of the color of my hair. And they wanted older people on the floor working. And I told them I just want to learn. And they gave me every opportunity to learn. And there was that purpose to come back. We would do freight on Wednesdays, and we'd be putting the freight around. And my motivation was I'd buy pizzas if we're halfway done so we get the freight out there. And then it picked up and other people did that. Or I'd go in and we'd share stories, and just made that experience a lot more fun, but it also, like I said, it gives you that purpose and reason to help others. I got to meet a lot of people from the community, which was very important. A lot of widowers that were looking for help, and a lot of times they just walked around the store just to talk. The reason this would hurt is a lot of people, when we're looking for workers, they might not want to pay into the payroll tax. And I was fortunate because, as the Minnesota Chamber says, 80% of the businesses already offer this. I work for the Minnesota Twins in the summertime. So we made an agreement with this small business that probably had less than 25 workers. And their agreement was, come May, at the end of May, I could leave until whenever the Twins were knocked out of the playoffs. And as we all know, that was always September, unfortunately. But that was an opportunity when the kids came back from school, and when they went back to school, I could be there to help out. And with that agreement, they didn't have to do it. They weren't told. It was a benefit that helped me, and it helped them. I think Minnesota expects us to work together. I think we're stronger when we work together and we listen, learn, and understand each other's points of views on the issues. And that's what I'm asking for today. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the report of the Conference Committee on House File 2. I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. So I guess the question is, why do we refuse to adopt sometimes or frequently? Well, one has become process-oriented. And as I said yesterday in the conference committee that I have been serving on, process has been good. It's been very respectful. I have been notified of things. I'm kept informed. Differences in policy are oftentimes hammered out and spoken about in the open. And then there's other conference committees that we see. I guess another reason would be because of bad ideas in the bill from a workability perspective. And don't hear me say that I'm demeaning ideological differences. What I'm talking about are the nuts and bolts or the workability of certain, and I've raised this objection to the many authors over the years about one of the principal concerns that I have, which is the IT part of this software, this magical software that's supposed to exist out there, that it doesn't. It doesn't work. The Washington model is deficient. The proposal for new technology should scare all of you who are associated with voting for this bill or on a committee or whatever, or if you work in technology, you know that simply assuming that an enterprise piece of software that will get stood up in a prescribed point of time is always going to work, that should frighten you tremendously. And because this piece of software doesn't exist, and because there are assumptions that it's going to go forward without hiccup or problems, that is optimistic and perhaps optimistically naive that this would actually come to a point where it could work. Now let's go to the next phase. You're seeing and have heard many, many points of pushback. And, you know, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we talked about education. What I know from speaking to many of the school boards in my district, there are several that I serve, they are terrified about what this does to them. That they don't have the ability to absorb what the costs will be because they can't, like a city, levy at the end of every year. So they have no methodology to come up with the money that's going to be taken out as a payroll tax. They have been objecting to this since this bill first came to light. I think I saw it 6 years ago. I think it's been in the works for quite a while. And I think Representative Bakeberg could probably tell you, and I think I just saw him get recognized, so I'm sure he'll tell you about some of the problems that arise from that. But I will also point out that I have taken a fairly concerted effort to meet with many small businesses in my district on main streets. And I've gone up and down various places in different cities that I represent, asking them, if this were to happen, what does that do to you? Not one of them has said, oh, I think this is a great idea, Jim. I think that this is exactly the way that I envisioned this if I ever envisioned something along those lines. You know, our Republican caucus offered some alternatives that I did run under the noses of some of the people that I talked to, and they liked a more market-based approach where they could enroll their employees, but that it was not as heavy-handed as this. The costs of this bill are groaningly heavy. They will be a heavy encumbrance on small businesses on Main Street throughout the state. It won't just be Waconia or Carver or Watertown, Mayer, Hamburg, New Germany, Chanhassen, Chaska, Victoria, places in places in Carver County where I know a lot of business owners. It won't just be there, but it'll be in places up north, in the resort areas. It'll be in Rochester. It will be in many places around our state where small business owners are trying to stay afloat. What will happen, as I've asked, and not only is it the school boards that are opposed to this, the chambers are opposed to this, NFIB is opposed to this, and they are truly the voice of small businesses. But what they're saying is, Jim, places like floral shops or jewelry stores, movie theaters, bookstores, coffee shops, small businesses are going to be put in the crosshairs. That's why we should send this back. We should say not only is a lot of the technology that this is predicated on not workable, doesn't exist today. That software does not exist. But moreover, why do we send it back? We should send it back because businesses are going to get hurt. You know, the bill that we debated yesterday, I think, if someone could maybe correct me, I think there were 65 mandates in the education bill. 65 mandates, unpaid, unfunded mandates. This is also going to be incredibly disruptive for the school boards. because they don't know how they're going to come up with the money for this. And I see some of you shaking your head at me in disagreement. Well, I've spoken to the superintendents. They're the ones that are saying this. This is not Jim Nash saying this. This is the superintendents that are saying this to me. This is the school board associations saying this. They are vehemently opposed to this. There's no funding that's going to be able to make this up. I talked to one of the superintendents and they said, Jim, if you combine paid family medical and the education bill with the 65 mandates in there, you would have to give us 10% and 10% on the formula just so we could break even. That's alarming. In my time here, I think this is the largest that we've seen, but it's traditionally been 2 and 2 on the formula. Well, you're down 8 and 8. And because the bill that came out of here yesterday hasn't become law, we don't know, but 2 and 2 is what's traditionally been on the formula. They're still down 8 and 8, and they're terrified because they don't know where that's going to come from. But Main Street businesses, there's a lot of restaurants in my town. There's one that just opened up. I invite you to come out. It's called Bodie Gray's. It's fantastic. It repurposed a building that when they said, oh, we're going to put a restaurant here, I didn't quite see how it would work, but it is now really a very attractive place. But they're going to have to do this because you're going to force this down their throat unless we send this back. And those owners, they don't have $100 bills falling out of their pockets. They're scrapping. If you've ever been in a startup of a business, you know, as I've said in the years past, you would mortgage everything, sometimes even consider mortgaging the dog, just to make sure that you have enough operating capital to keep going. That's why we should send this back, Mr. Speaker. That's why we should send this back and say to the conferees, you can do better. Technology does not exist and is suspect at best. At best. And I've asked the author in a number of committee stops, and this is not just this year's author, I've asked other authors in years past, help me understand the technology. Can't. It's always, well, we're going to take a little bit of this model and a little bit of that model, and we're going to hopefully make it work. If you've been here long enough and have lived through some of the technology disasters that we've seen here in the state of Minnesota, just that statement alone should terrify you. So that's why we should send this back. You know, I had a friend that reached out via text and said, Jim, we've been watching you. I guess they were really bored and they just wanted to see what we do down here when we have long floor debates. But they said, Jim, why are you making a motion to refuse to adopt? And I said, well, here's why. Here's why, because it's unworkable. Or in the case of the environment bill, rulemaking was thrown in very hastily and in a dark room. But why do we send things back? Because they can't work. We're trying to force the conversation because we were not invited to the table. That's why we send things back. We should not do this to the businesses and school boards. We should not do this to the mom and pops that are trying to open up a business in Main Street, Minnesota. You know, I have friends that own lots of businesses, and as I have said in the past, I am a recovering business owner, having sold my business. This is very heavy-handed. I think the term from Latin and in literature is due machina, the hand of God just sort of comes down and squashes you like a bug. Much like a Monty Python movie where you see the giant foot come down and squash you. That's this. That's why we send this back. That's why we should send this back. Don't allow the state to make the Latin term due machina become reality. Don't do that, because what's going to happen is the people who do own these businesses are either going to close them, and as Representative Joy, his chair is here at least, Representative Joy was pointing out how many of them will just go across the border to another state. Or, as is the case in some of my cities, people are just closing businesses that are portable, and they will take them to another state. That's why we send these back. You know, I don't want to read in the paper that gets delivered to my home that there are more and more and more bankruptcy filings, because that's where they publish them. If you ever watch, if you read the whole paper, you'll see that certain businesses are filing for bankruptcy. So, you know, you might see a machine shop file for bankruptcy. You might see a florist or a coffee shop. You might see a coffee shop file for bankruptcy. And we don't want to see that. You know, we don't want to see, you know, other things that are great attractions for us, like a movie theater. We don't want to see that happen. We don't want to read about that in the paper. That's why we send things back. That's why we say we're going to go back and maybe pull something out, or have the courage to say, you know what, we're going to bring it back into committee. We're going to hold it there. We're going to keep working on it, and we're not going to let this become reality, because it will adversely impact Minnesotans. It's going to put up a sign. You know, when you drive into various cities, you'll see, "Welcome to so-and-so. We're a friendly city," or "Welcome to so-where, you know, we're a tree city," or whatever. I think this sends a message to folks who might be driving into Minnesota. Welcome to Minnesota, we're anti-business. Members, support the Demuth motion. Send this back. Don't adopt this. As I said, I have yet to hear from anybody that this is something that they are desiring. What they're desiring is that you don't do this. What they're desiring is that they would not be forced into bankruptcy and personal foreclosure because they can't afford to keep up with the policies and the tax increases and all the different taxes that you're foisting upon them just this session. So, members, I would urge a green vote to support the Demuth motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Continuing discussion on House File 2, Conference Committee Report, House File 2, refusal to adopt. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. MNLARS, MNLARS, MNLARS. We can drop that. Guys, just in case you weren't aware of it, we replaced MNLARS in 2020. It's 3 years ago. We replaced it successfully in 1 year with off-the-shelf software. And the reason you haven't heard about it is that it works. It was a very successful project, and it's an indication of the way we now do things in Minnesota under the Walz administration, under the leadership of Commissioner Tarek Tomes. When we first proposed paid family medical leave 5 years ago, we were one of the pioneers, and there was no commercial off-the-shelf software available for purchase to support this application. The initial plan was to take the custom unemployment insurance system that DEED had developed with Deloitte as a starting platform and enhance it for use with paid family and medical leave. That platform performed admirably during the pandemic. We were one of the leading states in administering unemployment insurance during the pandemic. But we're no longer a pioneer. At least a dozen other states have preceded us, and we can leverage their work. Washington and Colorado have built and implemented paid family and medical leave systems, also working with Deloitte. And Oregon and Massachusetts have implemented paid family medical leave systems based upon the FAST Enterprise unemployment insurance application. Minnesota is a FAST Enterprises customer. We currently use a packaged FAST application for driver and vehicle services, which is what we use to replace to build the MnDrive system that replaced MnDRARS. And the Department of Revenue uses FAST GenTax system. All of the major vendors of payroll systems used by businesses have already integrated with these packaged paid family and medical leave applications. The current fiscal note for House File 2 is therefore kind of a worst-case scenario, as it reflects the cost of building a new system upon our current UI system, not buying a proven commercial off-the-shelf solution. DEED has recently received several very attractive responses to a request for information from these above-named vendors and others that would lead to us to believe that the actual IT cost could actually be significantly less than the amount estimated in the fiscal note. Members, we have 2.5 years to implement a commercial off-the-shelf software system. We have several to choose one, and it would basically be, similar to the replacement of MinLars with MinDrive, which, again, we did in 1 year. We've got plenty of time to do this, and the risk at this point, building upon the work that's already been done in other states to create a commercial off-the-shelf system, is there to be leveraged. The risk on this is extremely low. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Travers, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Sorry for that. And members, I stand to support sending this back because one of the challenges that we have is, and I'm not going to question the confirmands that are on there, but I am questioning that first of all, we did not have anybody on this side. I know that's a broken record. We've heard that before. But we also need some people with additional experience. Let's just use that so we don't talk about motives, but additional experience of running a small business from a different perspective. On this side of the aisle, we are generally made up of greater Minnesota individuals, suburbans. Yes, there are greater Minnesota reps on the other side, and that's great. But the vast knowledge over here that we have with members on our side of the aisle can make this bill better. When you take out that type of experience of individuals like myself who are already providing this benefit, I think I could bring additional experience to this. If not me, maybe Representative Joy, Representative Baker, Representative Nash, and so many others. Representative Knutson, who runs a small business in her backyard, and her family. One of the things why we also have to send this back is what I'm hearing. Again, this is a border perspective, which there's no one on the conference that has a district next to another state. I'm fortunate to have two states, North Dakota, South Dakota, but I really have people in my community saying, you mean I'm part-time, I work at the local hardware store, like Representative Weens talked about. I'm only there for a couple hours a week, and I have to take possibly 1 up to 7%, because if you do the math, this baby could explode. And we're going to have to take more of their payroll, not just the employer, but the employee's payroll. Right now, this week, we are doing a hiring process of part-time for the summer because we're busier in May, June, July than in February when there's a snowstorm. And these part-time people are like, really? So what we're going to start to do is not just export job creators, we're going to export staff members, employees, because big government knows best, because that's what this bill does, knows best, instead of someone who's handling their own financing and so forth, who's 18, who's 17, who's making money just to go to college. They're not looking for paid family time or anything like that. They're looking to make money for college because their family doesn't get free college because they don't qualify with that $80,000. That's a whole nother issue. Why we have to send this back is because we need that perspective of business owners who are already providing that. And we didn't hear that. Right now, with the Gold Cart side of my business, we have a staff member that just had a little one. We're already going on, I think, week 6. Time flies when you're having fun. It's not down here, but time still flies when you're having fun. And we're working. Now, we talk, I didn't, but my twin, the better half, the identical half, the better-looking half, talked to her this week, and she goes, you know what? I'm quite frankly getting tired of just being at home. I think I could work 2 or 3 days. I got grandma, which is her mom, who can watch over the little one. Can we make an arrangement that I could come in 10 hours I just miss everybody at work. I miss that work. You know what? A bureaucrat in St. Paul won't call her. The bureaucrat in St. Paul will not know the infant's first name or anything like that. That's another reason we have to send this back, because that practical experience, like my father would call street smarts, can serve the state well, can make this bill better, and so forth. And again, the challenge is, from a small business perspective, if somebody takes that full 20 weeks, folks, that's nearly 40% of the working hours that a person is gone. And then we got to scramble. And quite frankly, you're not going to scramble. What you do, just like what we've done, myself and Amber, another person, Nikki, we have been helping filling her spot, because you can't hire someone for 8 to 10 weeks and train them a whole new of something that she's known for 3 to 4, 5 years just to fill in 8, 9, 10, 20 weeks. It doesn't work. So people pick up the pieces, which mean they're working longer hours, which puts more stress on their family. And already 80% of the people are providing this. So this is why it's so important to get a different perspective, not to make this worse. We on this side of the aisle understand the importance of family paid leave. We're doing it. 80% of the businesses are already doing it. And in greater Minnesota, we do things differently. We heard a great speech yesterday on that. We just do things differently. We fill in differently. And that works. What works in St. Paul doesn't work there. And for surely, a bureaucrat sitting in St. Paul doesn't understand that. Let's make this bill better. Let's send this back to conference. And we would love to have one of our members help you out to do a better job, because we want to make this better. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members.
Continuing discussion on Conference Committee Report, House File 2, refusal to adopt. I recognize the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today in support of refusing to adopt the paid family leave and to send this back to the committee. We really need, I think at the very minimum, Minnesotans want us to be doing things the correct way. And this has been really reckless. And it's actually very surprising. You know, as I'll say again, but the Democrats, they have the governor, they have the Senate, they have the House. And so there's no reason to skip the corners. At the end of the day, they also have the votes. Their legislation is going to pass through. And so this is such a big bill. This is something that is literally going to affect every corner of Minnesota. And I've been talking to people in my district. The Red Wing Chamber, they are very concerned with this. They are begging us to look at this. There's other chambers of commerce in my district that are begging for us to do this. With a $17.5 billion surplus, it is shocking and surprising, and frankly, it's dangerous what's happening right now with the mass expansion of our government. Because there is something about doing things too fast and too recklessly. Even though you have the power, it doesn't mean that you should do everything. We should be responsible. I'm very concerned for our schools, as we are already putting on them so many new unfunded mandates, and this is one more that's just coming. Yet I still, as many times as I have asked, do not know how this bill, how schools are going to be able to pay for paid family leave. I am asking for this to be sent back. Let's look at it this way. This is like a salad bar. The session is a salad bar. Everybody walks through, you grab a salad. But you don't put everything on the salad, because in the end, it's probably pretty disgusting, and it's messy, and it's going to fall apart, and you really can't eat it all. Right now, because you had $17.5 billion surplus, because you had ultimate control, you took everything from the salad bar and you made this big, giant salad, or you're trying to, and Minnesota doesn't want to eat it. It's not very appetizing. It's too quick, it's reckless, it's messy. Members, let's send paid family leave back to the committee. There is absolutely no reason to be doing so much damage to Minnesota in one session. I know sometimes we don't like to look at facts, it seems like in here. I'm not sure why. It seems like they're very important. But I think that there's a few facts that we need to bring up again. And one is that last year we lost over 19,000 citizens who were taxpayers. Also, between the years of 2020 and 2021, Minnesota lost $1.5 billion of adjusted gross income. I know Representative Garofalo tried to discuss this. I think he even put up a little table in the back and tried to discuss with members in the back that we had lost $1.5 billion of adjusted gross income. I think Representative Pinto went back and got that lesson, so hopefully that went well for him. But that is the facts, Minnesota. That is the facts. We had lost $1.5 billion. It does seem like we want to California, Minnesota, and yet a couple of years ago, California sat at the same time where they had a large surplus. They implemented many of these laws that we are trying to do this session, and this is public knowledge. After implementing these laws, they are now in a huge deficit situation. Why are we looking to an example like California when what they did failed? Let me ask that again. Why are we passing laws and legislation that was tried, went through law, went through the process, was implemented, failed, and now the state of California is at an extreme deficit? As I grew up, I truly believed in what I'm going to call the American dream. The dream that if you worked hard, if you went to school, and if you worked hard, you could do anything. And that's when you hear the stories of very successful business owners in Minnesota and in America, I would believe that they believe that same dream as I did. That you would get educated, that you would work hard, that you would make a way for yourself. And the reason why paid family leave is very anti-American is that this is government dictating to businesses how to manage their businesses. 80% of businesses already offer benefits such as paid family leave. And yet, in the wisdom of this chamber, we think we know better than small businesses. We think we know better than the people that were willing to take out the loans, take out the financial risk, do the work, put in the time, and grow a business. 80% of businesses already offer benefits that are similar to this. And yet, in the arrogance, in the pridefulness of the bureaucrats who were elected to St. Paul, we believe that we know better. We offered amendments to even make this so that it wasn't quite so difficult, quite so bad for small businesses. We offered amendments to exempt small businesses that, were of 5 employees. But the Democrats said no. Can you imagine what kind of burden you are going to put on something like a daycare? A daycare that maybe only has 2 or 3 employees. And now they have to provide this leave. They have to. Because in our wisdom, in our ultimate wisdom, we made this law. Now we are in a workforce shortage, and that daycare, they don't have any other choices. They're paying an employee to leave on paid family leave. They don't have enough people to work in the daycare to provide for the children. If the children are not able to come to the daycare is also not going to get paid. And it's pretty easy to see how quickly that small businesses are going to close. I am from an area of many small towns. We have many businesses that don't have very many employees in them. We already have a workforce shortage that will literally shut down production because of the ultimate wisdom of this body, of the bureaucrats, of the Democrats who think that they know better. We need to send this bill back to the committee and hear the voices of the actual business owners, the people who are begging for this legislation to be stopped. I asked a researcher, more specifically, if they could give me some examples of other states that offer anything like this paid family leave. And it comes to find out that other states do offer versions of the paid family leave. However, what Minnesota did, the Minnesota Democrats, in their ultimate wisdom, in their ultimate arrogance and pridefulness this season, they literally took every version of a paid family leave that's offered in another state and made it as extreme as they possibly could. There is no other state that has a program this extreme in the United States. We have no idea how our businesses are going to be able to provide. And because I'm on the Education Committee, I have been all session talking very closely to school boards, to superintendents and administration. They're already struggling with having enough teachers. No one is answering how schools are going to magically bring teachers into the fold to cover for the teachers that are gone. And no one has answered who is funding this. That seems like 2 very important questions that a legislative body that is about to pass one of the biggest new business burdens that we've ever seen in the state of Minnesota might want to understand how our schools are going to be able to cover the workforce shortage and how they're going to pay for an unfunded mandate. We are incentivizing not working. And this continues to be a very common thread throughout this whole legislative session. Can anyone tell me a story of a hero, of someone that worked hard, someone built a business, that someone did something great? Whether they were an athlete, a business person. Someone share me a story that in that story they took off 20 weeks per year. We are incentivizing not working in Minnesota. We are incentivizing not being a productive part of our society. And that is damaging to us. We are not taking into account how small businesses are going to be able to keep their doors open. In rural Minnesota, I'm in a very strong agricultural district. We have times in our district, there's a co-op called Ag Partners. There's times when they are farming and they're delivering things to the farmers, whether it's fertilizer out to the field, seed, whatever it is. There's people that might be working 12 hours, 16 hours. And they have to do it because they have to get their crops in a very small window. And then they're paid for later, or they get time off later. But in that amount of time, there's only so much time to get their crops in. They have to work that much. Why is the government meddling in the private sector of private businesses making decisions of when their employees are going to be able to get off? I don't think we understand the unintended consequences that could happen to some of these businesses when all of a sudden they have to provide 20 weeks paid leave and they just don't have the workforce to do the job that needs to be done. We truly are having a clashing of ideas in Minnesota, and we're going to have to decide where we're at. Either we believe in people and we incentivize working hard to achieve, whether that's in school or whether that's in business. Or we continue down this path that we think we know better than small businesses, that we know better than the school boards, that we know better than local governments, the counties, the cities. And here in St. Paul, the bureaucrats manage and dictate to every other entity in Minnesota and tell them how to run their business. Paid family leave truly has the ability to be one of the most damaging laws passed this year to our small businesses. And just like many other of the pieces of legislation that have come across, this is falling on deaf ears, Minnesota. This is disgusting to watch. It truly is disheartening to see one party be so emboldened to think that they can just ramrod through this legislation system without any consideration of anyone else. Please vote to adopt refusal of the committee.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the conference committee report for House File 2. I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise to support the Damath motion to re-refer. I think I just want to circle back, though, and think about what is the problem we're trying to solve with this bill, but really this motion. And from this side of the aisle, the perspective that we have is we want to improve the bill. We want to make this bill better. And I think about, I look up in the gallery and I see a group of kids that just came in, not sure where they're from, and I waving to them, and I think about the work that we do here. The decisions that we make today are going to impact those young men and women for generations to come. And I think it struck me as they walked in, and now this group walking in, that sometimes we can get in this debate and be talking about these policy provisions, but maybe lose sight of the why behind what we're doing. And I think about the issue that we're trying to solve. I think about some of the staff, the young staff that are starting out their families. And I think back to a couple years ago, I had a staff member who had their second child, and her leave was burnt up because of how the timeline worked with her first. A program like this would help someone like that. Or as I was driving in this morning, if you listen to KTIS radio, they're doing this thing honoring mothers right now. And really some heartwarming stories about moms. And there was a story this morning about a young couple who had, I believe, a 2-year-old child, and they had just had twins. Both of those twins were premature. One of them is receiving significant medical support and is in the NICU. This would support families like that. So I don't think there's a person in this chamber who doesn't think that this is a really important topic to be talking about and discussing. And we've talked a lot about the different concerns. And I think really at the high level for me, it's just that there's not collaboration. And it's not just with House File 2. It's one party, one perspective. And I've said it before, frankly, that's poor leadership. If I, as a leader, don't take input from my staff, that's poor leadership. Because we always come to better conclusions, better solutions when we sit down and talk to each other and we can say, man, I've never thought of that perspective. I see Representative Stevenson coming in right now, and from my understanding with talking with Representative West, the cannabis bill is an example of some good back and forth, sharpening each other. And when I look at House File 2, there's some concerns because initially we can say, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to be able to be out on leave to care for or to support my family, but people don't understand some of the impact of that. And when I think about it from a school perspective, that's the lens that I obviously take, this is going to have an impact on our schools. It's also going to have an impact on our employees in the school. And this is what people, when I've talked about this, they don't understand that necessarily. So there's going to be a payroll tax, a 0.7% payroll tax, and that can be split between the employer and the employee, so 0.35, so just under 0.5%. And just on a very simple standpoint, that is going to cost one of my school district's employees, based off of last year's numbers, about $50,000 total for all of the employees at one of my school districts. It's going to cost the district about $50,000. Well, that's a teacher. That's a person that will lower class sizes by just off of this one mandate for 1 year. That does not take into account the additional costs, those costs that we don't always think about, like the substitute teacher, the administrative costs that we have to go through to hire those replacements, those long-term subs. And then I think the most important piece is the educational costs. So these kids that are now filing out, if they have a long-term sub in their classroom, that long-term sub is going to do the best job that they can do, but they're not the teacher that started the year with those kids, that know those kids. Whenever you have a substitute in a class, there's an impact. So there's an educational cost, and we can't quantify that with numbers. And what I continually hear from the schools that I work with is every little bit matters. Every little bit that we take away, Ben, it's only a 0.35% increase. That's okay. That's less that we have in the formula to be able to support kids. So what I would offer is that we send this back. We take the Dameth motion, and we take some of the components of the Min Family Plan that Representative Baker brought up. Phenomenal plan. And I think one of the things that really jumps out to me is paid family medical leave doesn't start for 2 years. Till January 1st of 2026, because there's so much that has to be done. Well, the Min Family Plan that the GOP offered, that starts January. By the time we come back to next session, the next time we're here, that plan would be up and running. The teachers that come back to school, and it happens every year, the teachers that come back to school and say, hey, Ben, just a heads up, don't tell anyone yet because I haven't shared with my colleagues, but I'm expecting and I'm due January 2nd. I would be able to say to that person, that's awesome, congratulations. Are you aware of the Min Family Plan to support you? But I would have to wait 2 years till 2026 under paid family medical leave as it's currently proposed. For that reason only, if we truly care about our workers, we should send this back, get this right, so that we can do this. The Min Family Plan is more flexible for our job creators, and it's more flexible for our workers. So I go back to those two stories I started with, that teacher who burnt through her sick time. Her husband works at a hospital, so he wasn't able to have time off. So which plan better meets the needs of that family? Or how about the family I heard about on KTIS radio this morning? That young family with a 2-year-old and their twins in the NICU. Paid family medical leave isn't going to support them, but we could get something in place to support families like them right away in a much quicker way. So I would strongly encourage, let's send this back. Let's get some bipartisan work done so that we can support and have strong families. We can support and have strong communities, and we can support and have strong schools. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the Conference Committee report for House File 2. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this bill has had an interesting path. When it was on the floor last time, back on May 2nd, we made a whole lot of motions because this bill missed a whole lot of committee stops with a really important document, a 73-page document, the fiscal note. We spent a lot of time talking about the fiscal note and how many stops it had with no fiscal note. And Representative Scott, you made a motion to send it back to judiciary because it had $315,000 on the fiscal note that you didn't get to discuss. Then Representative McDonald made a motion to send it back to Labor and Industry because it had a $1.5 million cost. That didn't prevail either. Neither of those prevailed. Then Representative Nash made a motion to send it back to state and local government. That one really should have prevailed because that fiscal cost was $53 million. So we're passing things through committees with no fiscal notes with an impact with as much as $53 million. But we don't know if that's even right either. Because when it did finally come to Ways and Means, and we had a fiscal note, apparently that fiscal note was wrong. And it wasn't just a little bit wrong, it was a lot wrong. And we didn't discover that until we were right here on the House floor. On Tuesday, May 2nd, we finally found out that no committees had an accurate fiscal note. Zero, none, not one committee had an accurate fiscal note. And we had to find that out on the House floor right here. We also had a motion by O'Driscoll, Representative O'Driscoll, to send it back to Commerce because it was just a $1 million cost. You know, it's funny how we members go, it's just $1 million, it's just $2 million, it's just $5 million. You know, it's so funny. If you ever said that in your home budget, you would that's just bonkers, Representative Ann New Brindley. That's bonkers. And then that brings me to actually Representative New Brindley because you made a motion, Representative Brindley, to send it back to Human Services because it actually had a $4 million cost. And about the nursing homes too. And so none of those motions prevailed. But what I didn't say is Representative Daniels could have made a motion to send it back to Children and Families because that is a fiscal committee. And the only reason he didn't raise a concern about it is because there wasn't a fiscal cost. But you know what? Here's the thing about when you're sitting on a fiscal committee. You don't know what you don't know. And he had no idea that their fiscal note had been ordered. He had no idea if there was going to be a fiscal impact to children and families. None. So he could have made a motion to also send it back to Children and Families. But we didn't do that because when the fiscal note finally came in, even though it was inaccurate to Ways and Means, it didn't show a fiscal impact. This bill could not have been done worse. This is a terrible way to make law. And like I said this on another bill, we are making law illegally. You cannot do this. You cannot just keep skipping things. Oh, speaking of skipping things, let's talk about it's skipping higher ed altogether. It has a massive impact on our two systems in higher ed, both the University of Minnesota system and the Min-State system. We never talked about it in higher ed. And I made a motion to send it back to higher ed, and none of these motions prevailed. Just in the higher ed system alone, it's 14 FTEs. That's a lot of FTEs. But it's not as many as setting up the program, which is 420 FTEs, which they could have talked about in all of those affected committees had they had the fiscal note, which they did not have the fiscal note. Now, I think really what was the most alarming for me, because I have been talking about process this entire session. I have never talked about process more in my entire career here, my 6 terms, than I have this session. I've never talked in Ways and Means as much about it or in Rules Committee because bills have gone so quickly and haphazardly through this body that they have missed fiscal notes, they have skipped committees altogether. They've been rushed through, and this is the worst example I have seen this session of a rushed bill. If any bill should go back to conference committee and actually do a thorough vetting, it is this one. This impacts every single employee in the state of Minnesota and every single employer who has an employee. Every single one. Every school district, every city, every county, every police department, every small business, every big business, every nonprofit. If you have one employee, this affects you. Let me just bring to your attention, you don't even have this anymore because it doesn't even exist online. Thank goodness I printed it out and kept it in my notes because this fiscal note doesn't even exist anymore. It was literally written over and called a revision. So this isn't even publicly available anymore. That's just lovely. I can't even believe that's true, but it is true. And I had read into the record last time we talked about this on May 2nd, the error, apparently, I found out after the fact, on page 54. And Representative Richardson said, oh, well, that's just an error. That was just an error in the fiscal note. That's how quickly these things are being rushed through. We literally went through Ways and Means, the last fiscal stop, the last stop till it comes to the floor. Can't really count rules because we're just calendaring the bill. We can't talk about anything except process, as Representative Long likes to remind me, because I don't talk about anything but process and rules, but I certainly have talked a lot this session. But just to show you how rushed this was, this is what was in the original fiscal note that we had in Ways and Means. And it says that separate accounts will be created for each employer to record premium payments into the account and benefits out of the account. Beginning in 2027, each employer's premium rate will be adjusted to the rate that maintains at least 1.45 times the amount dispersed from that employer's account in the previous year ending in September 30th. And annual premiums will be adjusted according to that. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I did not ask for that. So sorry, Mr. Speaker. Now I got to get back to my train of thought. So, Mr. Speaker and members, this fiscal note, we found out on the House floor, was completely and utterly inaccurate. And what it said was that each individual employer has their own each individual account, which probably will be true once you set up this monstrosity. And then whatever money goes in and whatever money goes out is specifically tracked, and that's probably true too. But it said that whatever came out in the previous year, you had to have 1.45 times, so 45% more than what was taken out in the previous year. And I went through the whole thing of, well, what if you've only got 5 employees and one employee takes 24 weeks? Because you know what the conference committee did is they actually reduced 24 possible weeks down to 20. So you get, there was a little give there, just a little bit of flexibility. Not enough, I would say, for an employer that has 1 employee or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 employees. But in any case, so if you've got, say, 5 employees and one of them goes on maternity leave, the way that it was, when it left this floor, you could take 12 weeks maternity and then you could take another 12 weeks of bonding. That's what the bill says, bonding. So that's 24 weeks. Now that's been reduced to 20 in the conference committee report. But that's an awful lot of money coming out of that account. Now, I was told that that's not the way it works, and that was just an error in how it was written. But that tells you how rushed this bill was. And it's still really rushed. There are so many problems with this that need to get fixed in the conference committee. Oh, yeah, and then the conference committee has 0 Republicans on it again. None. 0. Absolutely 0. So I'm not really sure what we're trying to accomplish here. There were a handful of conference committees that actually had Republicans assigned to them, and I do mean a handful. And then, like, if my brother, Representative Daniels, was on the floor, You know what happened to him. We had a long, protracted conversation about that. And finally, an apology came to him personally. And then finally, he was included in the conference committee process. He was allowed to offer his amendments that we heard on the House floor that, well, he didn't bring them. Well, when was he supposed to bring them? When? When they were not quite done going through side-by-sides? When they were behind closed doors in secret rooms making big deals? When was he supposed to do that? So we sent that bill back, and they actually had a public hearing and public discussion, and he got to offer some amendments, which of course were all rejected, which is really sad because one of them was really important to the deaf community here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So that's really sad that that was rejected. But honestly, this whole session has been incredibly sad. The trifecta has done what they wanted to do. They have done everything that they want to do. And I'm sure they're back in private rooms right now making more decisions without the public knowing, without members knowing. A consolidation of power. That's what this has been. It's been a long, long process of consolidation of power, skipping committees, not having fiscal notes, not having public disclosure, not having public input. One bill after another, but this is the king of the bills. This is the king of the bad bills. This will hurt Minnesotans the most. And I know you think that you're helping Minnesotans. But even in conference committee, you can see that there are vast concerns. There are massive concerns about this bill. And how do I know that? Because in the conference committee, you agreed to cap the payroll tax at 1.2%. I don't know how long that cap will last because I don't think that's even realistic. When you talk about the usage that will come, and who wouldn't use it? You know, if I could take 12 weeks off to take care of my grandchildren. And you all know about my grandchild, Avery, who was at Children's Hospital for the first 8 months of her life. And I spent a lot of time at Children's Hospital with my little grandbaby that almost didn't make it 4 times. She had heart attack and strokes, and I'm sure any mother, grandmother, auntie, uncle, cousin, sibling would love to go and do that. Who wouldn't use this? Who wouldn't use this benefit? Absolutely, people are going to use it. And I think that even in this fiscal note, the estimations of usage is incredibly low. Somewhere around 5%. That is completely and utterly unrealistic. And all you have to do is look at the other side, and you see that you could take it for almost anything. And there's almost no verification. I think something was added in, like if the employer finds out that you're lying about your usage, he can fire you. So now we're going to make employers be the punitive agent for someone that's abusing and misusing this fund. That's atrocious. It's inconceivable. Inconceivable that we would do that to our employers. There are so many problems with this bill. Like I said, it is the king of the bad bills this session. This absolutely has to go back to conference committee, and I don't even think with the entire time we have left of session that this bill can be fixed in conference committee. It really needs to go back. And I am absolutely dead serious. This absolutely needs to go back to the real committees of jurisdiction and talk about this in a real way with real public input and real numbers. If this fiscal note was so rushed through that even here on the House floor we were finding out that the fiscal note for Ways and Means had major errors in it, not little errors, not tiny, a misspelling, a comma, a period, an and or an or. No, it was massive errors. And if the people putting this together are that confused about it, then we need a lot more conversation about this. I don't even think conference committee is the place to even do this. I think this needs to go, it just needs to be tabled and dealt with next session, because this is absolutely not ready. I don't even know why we're rushing this through. You move the enactment date, you moved it out 6 months. It doesn't get enacted effective until January 1 of 2026. What are we doing? Why are we even doing this bill today? Is it so we can have a press conference? I don't know. What is the point of this? We could do it and do it right and have public input and have real numbers and not rush through and go through every committee it needs to go through with all of the information, with all the fiscal impact that's actually real, and we can actually help Minnesotans. I don't know if Representative Baker is going to speak, but he has a plan. We talked about it. I'll let him talk about it, but there are other ways to do this. This certainly is not the way to do it. So members, I hope that you would support the motion to refuse to adopt this, send it back to conference committee. I mean, it'd be even better if we just tabled this and worked on it next session, because it is absolutely not ready. There's so many problems with this. This is going to be incredibly expensive to business, incredibly expensive to every employee who has a huge payroll tax. There isn't hardly anything when it comes to checks and balances. You know, I mean, you could literally have grandma in Florida say, I need help, and have 50 different people fly to Florida for 12 weeks to go take care of grandma. There are no checks and balances. Nobody is watching this at all. With 420 employees setting this up, there's still nobody to even verify any of this stuff. You're going to make the employer check on their employees to see if they're lying about what they're using it for? Come on. Send it back to conference committee. Let's do this right. Or better yet, just table it, and let's do this next session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the conference committee report for House File Number 2. I recognize the member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Time to get a little more vim and vigor into this thing. Dragging a little bit. All right, we need to send this back. We need to refuse to adopt. We can make this better. Mamma mia, we can make this better. The implication of impact are not thought out. We don't need to mandate 65 mandates to our school districts. I have a school with a better plan. What do? Switch to this one and leave the good plan? In education, $7.2 billion is paid in salary and wages. At 7% payroll tax, that's $50 million. Oof to me. For my bold school district, that's $142,000. A big dent in a small school budget. Taking money from schools. Now, I could go through all kinds of other examples of what we're doing here, you guys over here are doing, with other fees and taxes that are being increased. My gosh, it's like piracy. Have you considered, you'd make wonderful Dread Pirate Roberts. Now, I did contact a superintendent who said this to me. This bill would allow our employees their accrued leave balances in lieu of family medical leave programs. If that's the case, we essentially will still be paying the full salary of the employee, the sub-costs, as well as still having to pay the payroll tax. This bill essentially does not help our employees, but rather uses public school districts to fund private programs. school districts should be excluded. And that's one thing that we should send this back to have considered. We need to hammer the point of unfunded mandates and the cost to our school districts. Now, it's tough to sit through all this and speaker after speaker talking about this, but it's important to hear. Sometimes I wish we could just skip to the end and say no to the pain, but it's an important message that needs to get out. We should send this back. We should refuse to adopt. It hurts our school districts. It's another mandate. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the Conference Committee report for House File 2. I recognize the member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. So I too stand for the Damath motion to refuse to adopt. Friends, we seem to have an issue in this body of lack of cooperation, lack of working together. Many of us grew up in an era where we watched Sesame Street. One of my favorite Sesame Street songs was called Cooperation Makes It Happen. Probably remember that. I don't have a great voice unless I'm singing karaoke, and we didn't start the fire, which, as I've said before, I truly wish Billy Joel would update his lyrics to that, because we have so much more to offer that song. But anyway, so the verse goes, cooperation makes it happen. Cooperation, working together. So you got these Muppets, right? And it goes, I saw these crazy dudes and they went out on the street. They were cleaning out the empty lot and making it neat. I said, man, this is cool. What are you trying to do? They said, making a garden for me and for you. The legislative process is like making a garden. We offer ideas, put those ideas in a bill. The chair decides of that committee if they want to bring that bill idea forward. And we work together to bring that vision to fruition. So the Muppets, they go, hey man, join us, come on, let's go. Together we can make a pretty garden grow. And together this body can make a bill, an idea, better when we put all of our heads together and work collaboratively. The girl says, I'll dig a hole. The guy says, I'll plant a seed. Together they sing, and we can add the water and all growing things need. Bills need all of our input because we all have different perspectives that can make that bill idea grow better. And then the verse goes, cooperation makes it happen. Working together, dig it. And the scene changes. Now they're in front of a building with two other Muppets, and they're in the shade. Now we friends were on the corner hanging out. I said, hey, you can hang around these garbage cans some other day. They said, man, is this cool? What are you trying to do? I said, make a street garden for me and for you. We are not asking to just hang around and be lazy. We want to be engaged in this process. Now, fun fact, this is my 13th year. I have never once been on a conference committee. I'm not sad about that because I know that there are many others in this building, in this chamber, that absolutely love being on a conference committee. And when those Republican members are named to be on the conference committee, I always shout out, you'll probably hear it, congratulations, you've done it. You are on the conference committee. Why? Because people love being engaged and being part of the process. So back to cooperation makes it happen. The verse continues on. Hey, cats, join us. Come on, let's go. We'll all cooperate and make a garden grow. You dig a hole and I'll plant a seed, and we will add the water that all growing things need. The verse goes, cooperation makes it happen. Cooperation, working together. So back to the body. If we all cooperate together, we can make this bill idea better. And we can address the needs that are being brought up here on the House floor simply by bringing it back to the conference committee and including the ideas the minority has. So now they're back in the garden where the plants have begun to grow. The Muppets are in the shade. Continues on now. Now we watch our garden grow, and we come back every day, and the people in our neighborhood come round and say, there's two friends now, hey man, this is cool. Tell us what we can do to keep this pretty garden here for me and for you. Everybody else sings. We all say, hey, join us. Come on, dig the scene. We'll all cooperate and keep our garden green. The girl says, you trim the leaves. The guy says, and you pull the weeds. The girl says, I will add the water that all growing things need. Back to the verse, cooperation makes it happen. Cooperation, working together. Friends, they came together. They grew a garden cooperatively, just like this body is trying to grow the best paid family medical leave bill possible. But it needs all of our ideas in order to do that. The current bill is lacking. It will crush every Main Street job sector in this state. There's a payroll tax reverted back to 1.2%, which it was at a 1%. Friends, everywhere we go right now in this body, in this capital, we are making it so much harder for employees and employers. Wage theft is happening legally because Democrats have an insatiable appetite for growing government, and then they come to the taxpayer and say, well, I'm just going to have to take it out of your paycheck. I'm going to have to take it out of your wallet. You're going to have less money for your family, but more money is needed for government. You deleted a language where the commissioner where if the commissioner has probable cause that an applicant or an employer has fraudulently obtained benefits, they must refer the case to the county attorney of jurisdiction. That language is gone. So there are no safeguards to prevent people from being fraudulent. And you call the payroll taxes premiums as if to hide from the public that they are going to have money taken out of their paycheck to fund this new, massive, government-run program. As was stated before, it's going to require a new IT system built from the ground up, from scratch. And we have a track record in Minnesota of not being able to do what is required when it comes to IT systems. A big fail. We're going to dump millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's going to be a massive failure. So if this bill is not taken back to conference committee, I'm afraid that there's going to be a lot of I told you so's. Years of development and over 400 new government employees. Over 400 more government employees to run this one program. And then you got that 0.7% payroll tax, which I think is wage theft. Wage theft. You're all against wage theft unless it's for a government program or some thing you want to fund, which now I'm hearing that Democrats would like to raise the gas tax. So that's just more wage theft. Let's see. And the tax is going to be regressive, okay? So you have a steeper hike for lower paid than higher paid workers. Someone earning $30,000 annually would see a 23% increase in their state tax liability. For a worker earning $100,000, the hike would be 13%. So you say you want to tax the rich. Tax the rich, tax the rich. They make too much money, tax the rich. But what you're really doing is you are taxing those who cannot afford to pay more. You are bleeding the middle class dry. And then you assure us, if you like your paid family and medical leave plan, you can keep it. Well, that sounds really familiar. I remember that with Obamacare. If you like your insurance, you can keep your insurance. Well, that kind of turned out to be a farce for many people. And then if that business did want to keep their insurance plan, though, this government, the House and Senate Democrats, make it super difficult to do so. Very difficult. You'd have to pay an accounting fee, and you would need to offer their own benefits that are at least on par with the state's program. So if the state's program is at this level, that little business who already offers their own version of a paid medical leave family plan would also have to have it at that same level. This means restrictions on when employees can take leave and how employers should treat employees who do, among others. Private benefit programs will be overseen by a commissioner who will have the power to terminate such programs if they violate the rules. So if government doesn't like what you're doing, guess what? You're done, terminated. You're going to have to offer the state-run program because we, the government, don't like what you are offering, little business. You know who can afford this stuff is big business, big corporations, the same corporations that were rewarded during COVID shutdowns. You get to stay open, big corporations. Little small business, little ma-pa, Main Street businesses there, you have to close down. And during those COVID shutdowns, during that time, you know whose wages increased? Were the CEOs of the big businesses. Now, big business really doesn't care about this bill. I don't think so. They got the funds to fund it, right? It's still going to come out of the employees' paychecks, blah, blah, blah. They've got attorneys. They've got people to handle the paperwork. They'll just hire some more people to do that. They'll raise prices on whatever they're offering. The public will pay more. But for the small business, they're not going to be able to do that. You know, in one of my committees, the Sustainable Infrastructure Committee, which still to this day I'm really not sure what that committee was about, we had a lot of discussion about our small cities and the inability for many of them to do paperwork for grants, for the federal dollars that are coming down. Spent a lot of time talking about setting up grant programs for these cities to be able to apply so that they could hire grant writers and such and such. But then on the other hand, you're like, hey, small business, you're gonna have to do all this paperwork, and if you don't do it correctly, we are going to fine you. So violations, warranting terminations could be as minor as the business failing to provide reports, and in addition, employers face penalties for record keeping and other violations of up to $10,000, which of course, very few, in my opinion, big corporations are going to have this problem because they have a whole slew of attorneys that will make sure that the rules are being followed. But gee whiz, the small business owner, if they don't dot the T, don't put a period at the end of the sentence, don't do something that government says they're supposed to do, they're going to be hit with a fine upwards of $10,000. It's really awesome. Sarcastic awesome, that is. Needless to say, the burden of complying with these regulations, as I said, will rest most heavily on the state's smaller businesses. That's crazy. It's a one-size-fits-all approach that will construct an expensive, invasive, over-engineered hammer to crack a relatively small nut. You are increasing taxes on every single employer, including private employers, nonprofit, cities, counties, and school districts. But gee whiz, those small cities and counties, they can't afford to or don't know how to do paperwork to apply for a grant for federal dollars. But we're going to expect them to follow through with this and make sure everything is freaking perfect, or they're going to be hit with a fine for up to $10,000. And then, of course, let's talk about childcare costs. Oh, childcare is so expensive. We're running out of childcare providers. What are we going to do with all the kids? There's nobody to watch the children. It's hard for people to go into work because there's no spaces, which is all true. Okay, that is all true. But this bill adds costs to the childcare providers. They are already facing high regulatory costs, and this drives up childcare rates without adding available revenue to raise childcare wages. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's progress? I don't think it's progress. I don't think it's fair. But then I suppose maybe next year, a year or 2 years from now, you're going to swoop in with some more government money and say, hey, child care providers, here's some more money for you. So you can rescue them. So you can say, hey, look at what we've done. Pat ourselves on the back. You're transferring $1,700,000,000. You're transferring from the general fund to the Commissioner of Deed to transfer to the Family and Medical Insurance Benefit account. Our poor nursing homes, A, they're not going to be able to afford this mandate, and B, this body, when the bill, the Human Service Bill passed out of this chamber, this body, the Democrats, funded nursing homes at $3.9 million. When we know that across the state, nursing homes are closing. Nursing homes are on a thin thread in some areas of the state, wondering if they're going to be able to manage to stay open next month. But yet, in this bill, House File 2, you are transferring from the general fund $1,700,000,000 to start this new government-run program. So, friends, cooperation makes it happen. Send House File 2 back to the committee and include a Republican voice to make the bill better. Mr. Speaker, I think that is prudent. It is not unreasonable. There's still plenty of time in the legislative session to get this done. Send House File 2 back to the committee. Members, vote to refuse to adopt. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt the Conference Committee report for House File 2. I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, we need to send this back. We need to make sure that all the voices of Minnesota are heard. We have this side of the aisle is completely shut out, which represents over 2,700,000 Minnesotans. and a lot of them small business owners. Small business owners were left out of this. There's a mandate on them that they didn't have a chance to talk about. Over 80% of our employers are small business owners. Most of them 5 employees or less. This is going to be a huge drain on them, doing the paperwork, doing the payroll stuff. And for those of you that at home that don't understand, this is also a payroll deduction on your paycheck. You're going to be paying for this, not only on your paycheck, but it's also going to be an increased cost to the business that you work for, which is going to be passed on to the consumer. So when you go buy something, you're going to pay more for it. This program comes out of your pocket. We are small businesses across this state, and in greater Minnesota, most of our businesses are small. We have our small mom and pop shops in our small towns. That's where we buy our stuff. And if they don't shut down, we got to drive farther to go get it. And I just heard today that they're looking at increasing the gas tax by attaching it to inflation. Automatic inflator on our gas tax. While we're already raising taxes about $10 million on top of a almost $19 billion surplus. It boggles the mind when you have that much surplus and you got to raise taxes. And most of the people that are going to pay these taxes are our middle income and lower income people. It hits them the hardest. And those are the people that the other side of the aisle says they stand for. That's poppycock. Doing everything you can to hurt them, to make them dependent on you. Nothing to bring them up, everything to keep them down. But there again, it's going to hurt small businesses big time. And that's going to hurt the greatest part of Minnesota, the 80 counties outside of the 7-county metro area, which was shut out on this conference committee and not given a voice. That's why it needs to go back to conference committee on the DeMuth motion. Now, it was interesting. Earlier this week, I found an article. For those of you who live in Minneapolis and represent that area, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, you've had 1,400 businesses leave or shut down in the city of Minneapolis. And that's a report from the United States Postal Service, where they're no longer delivering the mail to that business in Minneapolis. 1,400 employers gone. I have no idea how many jobs that was, but I'm sure it was a lot. It's fun watching some people over on the other side of the aisle laughing at that. It's disappointing. It's a serious issue. I got a email from one of my school superintendents of the 7 school districts I represent with the stuff that this body is putting on our school district alone. Even though you did 4 and 2 on the formula yesterday, which brought in about a little over $7 million to one of those districts, the other stuff you're putting on it is costing them almost $13 million on top of that. So what your bill did yesterday and the other stuff that we've done is a $5 million+ deficit to that school district. And they were on the edge of having the state take over already because of funding. You should be ashamed of what you're doing. It's no wonder that this body of the legislature, the House and Senate, have such poor ratings in the polling. Because we're doing everything, I should say, you're doing everything that is hurting this state, hurting the citizens of Minnesota. Yes, is it good? A good program? Representative Baker had a great one that works much better at almost no cost to the state, and it could be up and running by the end of this year. Yet you said no. Yeah, you're working for the citizens of Minnesota, unfortunately. And our polling numbers are going to keep going down because of what the majority is doing to this state. It was really interesting yesterday listening, I believe it was yesterday, everything's mixing together. No, it was earlier this morning on a bill. Hearing the talk about it, about the negotiations, about how the three bodies work together. Let's see, there's the House and the Senate. I can't figure out where that third body is unless you're bringing in the executive branch into your negotiations that we don't know about. The House and the Senate send stuff to the governor. He says yes or no. This body and the other body decide what's sent to the governor, not the governor telling us what we're going to do. If we're going to have that, we might as well just leave, go home, and sine die now. Let's just send this back under the Demuth motion, get it done properly, get everybody involved, get the small businesses involved, because that's our largest employers. It was mentioned earlier that 80% of large businesses that are in the chamber have this program. They can afford it. If you have 5,000 employees and one or two are gone on this program, it doesn't affect them that much. But if you have 2 or 3 employees and one goes, that's 30% of your employees at one time. That hurts. It hurts the business. It's time to look at everything and making sure that we don't hurt anybody on a program. Send this back where it belongs and get it fixed correctly so that everybody is representative in the negotiations. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, the Majority Leader, Representative Long.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Conference Committee report to House File Number 2 be laid on the table.
Representative Long moves that the conference report on House File 2 be laid on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails, and the conference report on House File 2 is laid on the table.